Since its inception in 2011-2012, the Common Core standards have changed curriculum across the nation and sparked outrage and concern from parents and teachers. Director of Curriculum Instruction at Lansing School District, Lauren Fessler, explains the new standards.
Common Core is a set of expectations for learning outcomes for students at grade level pre-K through 12 in ELA and mathematics.
Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Dryden School District, Adam Bachner, explains how Common Core is different than the previous system.
One is the fact that they are designed backwards. They're designed starting with what people believe students need when they graduate from high school. And when I say they were designed backwards, what I meant was once they had graduation expectations in place, they then went grade by grade in reverse. So 11th graders need this, 10th graders need this, 9th graders need this, back down. Another big difference with the Common Core is that it's been adopted by many, many states. People keep calling it a national system. It's really done by a cooperative of states. So it looks pretty national because there's a vast majority of states adopted it, but the states created it and adopted it independently. That's a big deal because here in New York, as we are working on doing Common Core alignment, I can do a Google search to look for resources or look for ideas or look for teaching practices and find things that are happening in Kansas or find things that are happening in Florida or find things that are happening in a whole slew of states that are directly applicable to what we're doing in New York. The third big difference is that although it is a state-by-state effort, the federal government did in fact climb on board and push for the adoption of the state standards through a variety of different funding mechanisms where essentially this federal government has a very limited role in public education. They're not allowed to say something like, you have to adopt these standards. They are allowed to say something like, we're not going to give you federal money unless you adopt these standards. So they did that in a couple different ways and really pressured a lot of states. And this was at a time when, during the recession, the state education budgets and local education budgets were really in great need, and the federal government stepped in with a lot of money.
School teacher at Syracuse City School District, Joseph Griever, explains how the standards will change the program he teaches once Common Core is fully applied.
For example, in my concentration, we move away from the typical multiple choice answer to on a standardized test to analyzing documents and giving an extended response rather than picking like an ABCD answer.
Fessler explains that although the standards were intended to create universal, higher standards of learning across the nation, what changes will occur depends on the teacher and the course.
It means different things in different, like I said, different things in different courses. Some people change many materials. Some people are adapting many of the math modules and some of the ELA modules. Others are using the instructional shifts and change in mathematics practices with material that they've used all along.
She explains why the standards were implemented by Governor Cuomo's office in New York.
It was to address the U.S.'s performance on international comparisons, feeling that our students were not learning as much or at the levels that students in other westernized countries were. So there's just that piece that it felt like it was time in the 21st century to raise the standards and our expectations for what it is that students learn in public schools.
Another reason for Common Core is to help students prepare for the challenges they will face after college and high school. Once Common Core was executed, its supporters and opposers came out of the woodwork. Joseph Griever explains how he thinks it will affect his students.
I think in the short term, it will clearly bring down graduation rate. If they can't clear the Common Core algebra, then they won't move on to graduation because that is one of the big 5 exams they need.
The school teacher explains why Common Core will fail his students.
And it's counterintuitive to what their instincts tell them, particularly the easiest example is with math and the way they're taught to solve problems under Common Core versus how they they've been taught all along.
According to him, if Common Core was done differently, students would not be affected in a negative way.
It should be rolled out initially in the elementary grades and then work your way up. If you implement it across the board in a single year, you don't have students who are prepared for that type of test.
He goes on to say that if schools started at the kindergarten level and each year add on a new level as students progress, by the time high school comes around, they will be prepared for Common Core. Griever is far from optimistic about Common Core.
Overall, I think it's a mistake for students because implementation is not been done correctly. It's been done too quickly. It hasn't been funded the way it should have been. And for some students, it's simply not going to work.
On the other hand, Anna Bachner is less guarded about Common Core, believing in its benefits, despite test scores dropping at Dryden during the initial transition period.
Overall, I think the standards themselves are very high quality. They set a very high bar. It's making the profession a very tough place to be, and that's not a good thing for kids. But in the long run, I think that it is good for kids. I think the implementation was botched in the state of New York. I think it was rushed. I think the way it got itself tangled up in national politics is unfortunate. I think there are things in the education reform sphere that really are pretty bad for kids, and that this is sort of tangled up with these other things. But overall, just the standards themselves, to read the standards document, they're not perfect, but they're better. And what we were doing before, I don't believe that there was a crisis in education, but if you don't change, you die, and to just keep on doing what we've been doing won't work. And when I walk into a school that looks pretty much like it did when I was a student in school, it's not sustainable. There's more. I really like this next quote. There's more honors students in China than there are students in the United States. And these are people that our kids are going to be competing with. And the mission of schools is not purely an economic one. It's not purely a national security one. So I don't want to go too far down that road. But the truth is, we need to raise the bar because other countries are, and it's a global economy. And I want my kids to be able to compete successfully. So anyhow, I guess my overall impression is that I'm hopeful.
Bachner believes one of the reasons people are uneasy about Common Core is because of the various fraudulent theories parents and members of the community have fallen prey to.
People feel like the Common Core was developed in secret, which it wasn't, and that it was developed without the input of teachers, which it wasn't. There was lots of input from teachers. They felt that it was designed as part of a reform strategy that is promoting charter schools and that is destroying labor unions, and that it's a profit-making scheme for major textbook companies and test manufacturers.
Lauren Fessler is also hopeful of Common Core due to the positives she has seen and heard.
I've heard a number of teachers remark at how well engaged students are with higher expectations in the classroom and how much fun it really is to watch them managing the more conceptual and complex content.
She also says that other examples of positive changes in student learning include an increase in interaction with children and their peers. But that doesn't mean she hasn't heard some grievances.
Too much, too fast. Everything's tied to changes in teacher evaluation. Not enough support for professional learning or materials around the implementation. Yes, there are many complaints.
Dryden parent Christine Guest watched her daughter Julia suffer with Common Core.
I mean, our daughter is high honor roll, but we see the amount of work she has to do because of Common Core, and it's taking a lot of time in the evenings to get through all of her schoolwork.
But the effects on her son Joshua were particularly troublesome.
With our son in particular, he would come home from third grade, and he would work on his math homework for 4 hours. He would take a break for dinner, and when he was finished with his math homework, he would then do his ELA homework, and then he'd go to bed.
Guest says gym and recess were the only opportunity for a physical outlet for her hyperactive son. She says this is not healthy for young kids, especially for a nation concerned with childhood obesity. It was these reasons that led to Guest and her husband pulling Joshua out of public school and attend a Montessori school instead. A change that has proved to be a great benefit.
We've seen a great improvement in his communication skills and his social skills and his ability to process since we've moved him to Montessori. But the school is based on that students don't all learn the same way, which is one of the reasons that I think Common Core is failing.
But the added stress is not the only reason why Guest truly believes Common Core is a detriment to students.
I think one of the fundamental problems with Common Core is that it doesn't address the way that multiple students learn. So in any given classroom, you could have a student that's a visual learner, you could have a student who's an audible learner, you could have a student who's a book learner, you could have a student who's a mixture of any of those combinations. Common Core delivers the curriculum one way, and it's not flexible.
She says that experimentation is the key to learning and success, and that Common Core stifles creativity and critical thinking is removed from the equation of problem solving.
My fear is kind of like watching ants. They walk across the field, and a twig falls, and they have to wait until the leader ant comes over and tells them how to go around the twig. We're not really allowing students to figure out how to solve problems in multiple ways by telling them this is the only way to do it.
Students in the United States are far from number one in English, math, and science compared to children in other countries. Some believe Common Core is the answer to improving the quality of education in this country, while others cannot see past what they perceive as weaknesses or reasons to discredit the standards as a whole. If the supporters of Common Core and its critics can come together and build an educational platform addressing the very real problems students will face as adults and what skills they will need to overcome those challenges, but do not lose sight of the possibility of students becoming overwhelmed, stressed, and be smothered by anxiety, and then perhaps Americans will finally have something to be number one about, other than incarceration rate, illegal drug use, obesity, and pornography produced.